Hello everybody, Connor here, and welcome back to another episode of Gaming Retrospective. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the most iconic games of the early 2000s, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. Battle for Bikini Bottom is a 3D platforming game based around SpongeBob. It released on October 29, 2003 in the US for PlayStation 2, GameCube, Xbox, PC, and Game Boy. The three consoles received the main version of the game, and the PC and Game Boy Advance both received different versions for their respective hardware. The PC version of the game was a point-and-click minigame compilation, and the GBA version was a 2D platformer. Personally, I grew up with the GBA version of the game. We had the SpongeBob Game Boy, so it only made sense we had the game to go with it. We actually had the cartridge that had both Battle for Bikini Bottom and Nicktoons Freeze Frames Frenzy. I'm gonna be honest, I've maybe spent a total of 20 minutes in my lifetime playing the Nicktoons game. I remember it being similar to Pokemon Snap, where you walk around and take photos of the different Nicktoons. It just makes a lot of sense that they would bundle this with another game, because I don't think I could justify buying this game on its own. Anyways, I spent most of my time playing the other game on this cartridge. I actually enjoyed the game for what it was, a simple 2D platformer. It may not be as ambitious as the home console versions, but it does its job. I remember keeping a slip of paper with the different passwords for the game so I could go back and play the different bosses. I remember the Squidward boss really stood out to me. The clarinet noises are still ingrained in my head to this day. I also got a brief taste of the PC version from this demo disc. I only remember the trivia game and the vine swinging game. This is one of those things that you faintly remember as a kid that you always thought was a dream, but it turned out to be real. I ended up getting the version for the GameCube later on. It was developed by Heavy Iron Studios and was published by THQ, which handled pretty much all the licensed kids games in the early 2000s. I mean, they made Ratatouille for the Wii. The majority of the licensed kids games in the early 2000s were pretty forgettable though, but there was something special about Battle for Bikini Bottom. This game was on par with some of the best 3D platforms in its era. The plot of this game is that Plankton created an army of robots to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, but he ends up messing up the process and the robots don't obey him. So it's up to SpongeBob and his friends to save the day. The goal of this game is to collect all the golden spatulas. This is SpongeBob's alternative to the stars from the Mario series. There's a total of 100 to unlock in the game, and every area has a set of golden spatulas with a unique mission to collect them. You're able to play as SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy, and they all come with their own special abilities. SpongeBob has his bubbles, Patrick's able to throw objects, and Sandy has her lasso. This adds a lot more variety to the game, where some characters have access to exclusive sections of the levels. There's 10 areas or worlds of the game, all based on locations in the show. You have Bikini Bottom, Jellyfish Fields, Downtown Bikini Bottom, Goo Lagoon, the Mermalair, Rock Bottom, Sand Mountain, Kelp Forest, Flying Dutchman's Graveyard, and SpongeBob's Dream. There's some parts of these levels that are a bit tedious, but it's really easy to look past this because of how good other aspects of the game are. The platforming in this game is really fun, the characters control really well. I was surprised about this because of how old the game is. I also enjoyed playing through the boss fights. They provided some challenge, but they could be a bit shorter since they seem to drag out a bit. The collectibles are also enjoyable in this game. I had a good time exploring the levels for Patrick's socks and collecting shiny objects to trade into Mr. Krabs for a golden spatula. The voice actors reprised their roles in this game, except for Mermaid Man and Mr. Krabs. They were recasted, but they just sound so off.
Treasure chest's looking a bit light, boy. Do you think I've got bilge water on the brain? I ain't running a charity here. Come back when you've got enough shiny objects to trade.
Huh? What? Oh, yeah, it's that sponge kid. And now, what was I supposed to tell you?
I understand they probably couldn't get all the voice actors to come back, but it felt like they didn't even try to find somebody that sounded like the characters. After the success of the original game, there was also a few indirect sequels. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie video game is very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom and came out a year later in 2004. It was also developed by Heavy Iron Studios, but it was the last SpongeBob game they would make for a really long time. From 2004 to 2009, the SpongeBob video games were developed by different studios, and many agree that they don't hold up to the same standard as Heavy Iron's games. I remember getting Creature from the Krusty Krab for the PS2 and being disappointed in the game. There was just something about it that felt bland. I remember playing the first level and not really playing much after that. The art style in the first level is also disgusting. I mean, look at this. Like, is that what you want out of your SpongeBob game? Because it's not what I want, personally. After a 5-year hiatus, Heavy Iron Studios returned to making SpongeBob games and released Truth or Square in 2009 for the Xbox 360 and the Wii. This game is very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom, but it's not really as popular. Most likely because the player base grew up and checked out by the time it released. Aside from those games, Battle for Bikini Bottom is really solid on its own and beloved by many SpongeBob fans. Because of the game's popularity and longevity, THQ Nordic decided to remaster the game for modern platforms. Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated was announced a few days leading up to E3 2019, and the game ended up releasing June 23, 2020. The remake looks so bright and colorful and is very faithful to the original. They kept Mr. Krabs' voice the same, which is a bit of a bummer because it just doesn't sound good, but it can be overlooked. Despite the game polishing the original, many players still prefer the original version of the game. There's just something special about the original that the remaster just can't capture. The roughness of the original is just iconic. In conclusion, Battle for Bikini Bottom is a classic and is one of the best 3D platformers of all time. With its engaging gameplay, humor, and memorable characters, it managed to get past the mediocrity often associated with licensed games. Despite its age, the game's platforming mechanics remain surprisingly enjoyable, making it clear why Battle for Bikini Bottom has stood the test of time. I'd give this game a 7 out of 10. If you haven't experienced it yet, you definitely should. Either the original or the remake is fine, they're both very solid games. Battle for Bikini Bottom is a shining example of how a game can expand upon its source material and stand as a memorable and beloved title in its own right. It continues to be celebrated by SpongeBob fans to this day. Battle for Bikini Bottom is like a time capsule to a long-gone era in gaming.